Good morning, everyone. My name is Ashley Stills, and you are currently attending the Georgia Rehoused Competitive Application Workshop. Your presenters today will be myself and Miss Alona Nagy, who is our Home Art Manager. The mission of the State Housing Trust Fund for the Homeless Commission is to support communities that provide housing and services for individuals and families striving to end their state of homelessness. There are three functions of the State Housing Trust Fund. The first being the State Housing Trust Fund Administration. The second, the State Housing Trust Fund Initiatives and Programs, in which Georgia Rehoused falls under. And then our third, the Collaborative Partnership for Federal Programs, to include our Balance of State Continuum of Care, statewide HMIS Administration, and Emergency Solutions Grant. Our agenda for today is on the screen. We will do our program overview, the application process, application and award timeline, grant term for funding cycle 2, application limitations, submission requirements, the threshold requirements, the evaluation categories and point structure, the award process, and then the funding source requirements. I do want to do a little housekeeping right now. If there are any questions, feel free to put them in the chat or raise your hand, and we will acknowledge you during the call so that you can ask your question, and we'll also be checking the chat for any questions that you may have. An overview of the Georgia Rehouse program. There are 6 funding sources available under this program. They are all listed on the screen, but I will go through them individually as we have 2 new funding sources this cycle. The first one that we have, which is the same from the last cycle, is the State Housing Trust Fund for the Homeless, Acute Homeless, and Prevention Services Grant, and grant awards for up to $3 million. The second is going to be the State Housing Trust Fund for the Homeless, Acute Homeless Response Grant for capital projects, and the grant awards up to $10 million. The third is going to be the State Housing Trust Fund for the Homeless Residential Housing Solutions, and those are grant awards up to $2.5 million. And then our 2 new ones are the State Housing Trust Fund for the Homeless Veterans Homeless Response and Prevention Services, with grant awards up to $3 million. And then our second new this funding source this cycle is the Georgia Rehoused Veteran Housing Solutions, which is grant awards up to $2 million. And then our last funding source is going to be our Home Art Small Scale Rental Housing for grant awards up to $2 million. I do want to go over the application process right now. So it is one competitive process for all 6 funding sources. And just kind of a visual on the side screen is that first you do the notice, we release the notice for pre-applications, and then there is the pre-application process, and the State Housing Trust Fund then provides a recommendation for your competitive application, whether you should apply in the current round or whether you should wait for future rounds to apply. And then under that, there is the release of the 6 funding sources notices for Georgia Rehouse, but there is one competitive application that you use to apply for all 6 funding sources. And the reason that we did this is that we wanted to make it easier for applicants who may be eligible for multiple funding sources to have one application, one universal application that they could apply to versus having to apply to 6 different applications. So in addition to the application process kind of that I just went through, applications will be expected to meet all of the eligibility requirements in the pre-application and address any recommendations from the State Housing Trust Fund prior to submission of their competitive application. And then applicants should read the notices of funding and Georgia Rehouse competitive application requirements and the Georgia Rehouse eligibility requirements and any other documents or updates as it pertains to Georgia Rehouse prior to the submission deadline. We'll go over the application and award timeline now. So for round 2, which we're currently in, the pre-applications opened on July 1st. They closed on July 29th. The competitive applications opened on July 22nd, and the competitive applications will close on August 19th at 5 p.m. And then the award decisions, approvals, and contracts will happen in September of 2026. We do reserve the right to adjust any of these timelines. I do want you all to make note of that. And then for our third cycle, we're tentatively looking at opening the pre-applications in January of 27, closing them in February of 27, opening competitive applications in February of 27, and then closing competitive applications in March of 27, with award notices and contracts going out around April 2027. So I wanted to also go over the grant term for cycle 2 funding for each of the funding sources here. So for the State Housing Trust Fund Acute Homeless Response Grant for Supportive Services, your funds must be spent by March 30th, 2029. For your capital projects, they should be spent by September 30th, with your construction beginning within 6 months of the executed agreement. For your residential housing solution, the same funds must be spent by September the 30th, 2028, with your construction beginning within 6 months of the executed agreement. And then for your veteran homeless response and preventive services, your funds must be spent by March 30th, 2029. And then for your veterans housing solutions, funds must be spent by September 30th, 2028, with your construction beginning within 6 months of your executed agreement. And then for home ARP, the funds must be spent by June 30th, 2029, but your construction must begin within 1 year of the award grant year. And I do want to make note that the home ARP is our federal funding source. So those requirements are going to be different than the other 5, as the other 5 are completely state funded. So your applications will be evaluated to determine feasibility of the use of the proposed funding to support the respective programs. And DCA reserves the right to make any number of awards or no awards under these notice of fundings, and then requests for applicants exhibiting significant capacity concerns regarding any of the requirements in the NOFAs will not be awarded. Applicants must be compliant with DCA's development and management requirements and be in good standing with all departments of DCA and GHFA, including Housing Finance, Housing Towards Voucher, Housing Assistance Division, and CDBG, regarding any program properties in any DCA and GHFA loans, and not have received a temporary suspension from receiving federal funds. And also, DCA reserves the right to utilize the resources listed and or additional DCA resources if available to maximize efficiency as circumstances necessitate. So applicants may apply for multiple funding sources under Georgia Rehoused. However, a single project cannot be submitted under more than one funding source. We have a diagram here just to kind of make it a little bit easier. So if project A is submitted for one funding source under Georgia Rehoused, you can't submit that same project A under another funding source in the funding cycle. So just kind of wanted to be clear on that. So you wouldn't be able to submit project A 6 times under Georgia Rehoused for different funding sources. Here are the application submission requirements. All applicants must submit a job form and the narratives. Each of the narratives have page limits. We'll go through those briefly. So for your executive summary, there's a 2-page max. The evidence to support rating factors criteria include there's a number of persons assisted. There's a 2-page max on that. Your strength of project concept and partnership has a 6-page max. Your leverage of funding has a 2-page max, and you must use the budget template that DCA has provided. It is on the State Housing Trust Fund Georgia Rehoused page. That template must be used. And then for your geographic distribution, there's a 2-page max on that as well. For your leverage of funding, there's a 2-page max. Again, you must use the budget template that has been provided, but if you are asking for capital dollars, you must provide a 15-year pro forma for those capital projects. And then for your nonprofit organizations, you must submit your nonprofit certification. So these are the threshold requirements. So any application that does not meet all of the threshold requirements will not be evaluated and awarded. So you must meet all the pre-application requirements. In order to apply in the competitive round, you must have completed a pre-application and received a recommendation letter and address those recommendations in your competitive application. You must meet all the notice of funding eligibility requirements for the funding source that you are applying for. You must be able to meet all underwriting and feasibility requirements, and that includes the 100% match that is requested for each funding notice. And in each funding notice, it breaks down what the match requirements are for each of those notices, and each of them are different in each notice. So please pay special attention to it. All applications will be evaluated. We will go over the categories and the point structures on the next slide. You must meet these threshold requirements, and you must submit all the required narratives in your application, and your proposals must incorporate evaluation categories as we have outlined that are outlined in the Georgia Code Section 8-3-310, but that is on the next slide where we'll show you what that structure is. And you must clearly demonstrate how these projects meet the category used for evaluation. Here are the evaluation categories and the point structures for those evaluation categories. On the next few slides, we will go over kind of what the scores are looking at when they are evaluating for each of these sections. I won't go through each question one by one just because there is a plethora of them, and in the interest of time, I want us to get through the notice of funding and be able to answer any questions that you all have. So your funding categories are the numbers of persons assisted. That is a 20-point max on that. Your strength of project concept plan and partnership has a 45-point max. Your leverage of funding has a 20-point max, and your geographic distribution has a 20-point max, with a total score of 110 for the evaluation. So as I said, we will go through kind of some of the questions on what is looked at under each of these sections. It is quite a bit of information, but as I stated before, we will be putting this PowerPoint and this recording on the Georgia Rehoused page. And if there are any questions, feel free to reach out to the State Housing Trust Fund after you are able to read through the information. But for the number of persons assisted, these are the things that the scores are looking at when they are evaluating the applications. So for instance, does the application use credible data sources to quantify need? So are you looking at pit count data? Are you looking at McKinney-Vento data? What credible data sources is the organization using to quantify the need under the funding sources that they are applying for? Another one is, does the project align with local coordinated entry systems, regional homeless strategies, or statewide consolidated plans? Here are a few more of things that we are looking at when we are scoring. Does the application provide the number of individuals to be sheltered or transitioned through the project, and explain how this target was calculated based on local need and facility capacity? And does the project identify local economic issues where a lack of housing and services prevent vulnerable workers from maintaining or securing employment? So these two slides specifically are looking at what we are looking at when we are evaluating the number of persons assisted, which has that max score of 20. Next, we'll look at what we're looking for when we are looking at your strength of project concept plan and partnership. So some of those things are, does the project include the list of partnerships and demonstrate that the partners have experience administering programs for vulnerable individuals and families? And does the project describe the site location, including accessibility to transit and other amenities nearby? And does the project describe how the site location will meet the needs locally of the qualifying population? Here are the additional things, such as if proposing adaptive reuse or scattered site housing strategies, is there a justification for the site selection by demonstrating how the proposal maximizes efficiency, minimizes development or tenant barriers, and adds social and economic stability in the community was provided? And did the applicant provide a map or a narrative describing the geographic relationship between the site and specific healthcare and social services providers identified in the partnership if they will not be provided on site. Here are more things that the scoring team is looking at when they are looking at your strength of project, concept plan, and partnerships. What is the distance to public transportation? Is there an evaluation of walk score provided on someone who may not have transportation? What would it look like for someone walking in that community? And did they provide detailed approximation to employers or industrial centers? More on strength concept, project of concept plan and partnerships. Did the project describe how the project concept management practice are informed by people with lived experience? Um, are fair housing regulations being followed? Did the application provide documentation of how the project is either physically or operationally linking to transportation, employment, healthcare, and other services that a participant in the program may need? And does the project demonstrate there's a regional competitiveness and spillover benefit? Is there employee attraction, retention in that area? More on here, specifically want to mention or point out, does the plan include procedures for using HMIS or other data systems to monitor service delivery and measure the program impact? And for those requesting capital dollars, development schedule, these are the things that the scorers are looking at when they are looking at your development schedule. What is the site control? What are your environmental review completion timelines? Site and utility assessments, when will those be done? What is site preparation going to look like? How long will that take? What is the timeline for design development and changes, and what is the timeline for your final inspection? So these are a list of things that the scoring team will be looking at when they are looking at your development schedule. So on the notice of funding, there is a requirement for those building or renovating or anything involving the capital projects that requires a development schedule, and the development schedule needs to be detailed and to ensure that you are including these things on your development schedule. And we have two more slides that talk about the strength project concept and plan of partnership. This is the first one. Just a little bit more, is it backed by a management structure that safeguards public resources and ensures residents are positioned for success? Does the plan demonstrate that you have internal and financial controls to be good stewards of the dollars that your organization could be awarded? Do you provide a summary of your organization's current supportive services, including your current target populations, service scope, and your geographic coverage? And if capacity gaps exist, does the application describe the plan to supplement capabilities through partnerships, consultants, or technical assistance? Again, this all will be on the DCA website, and we have one more on strength project concept and plan, because I know this is a lot of information, but we will provide you a copy of this. And do you have MOUs in place with your partnerships, or what do your partnerships look like? And do you plan, does the plan indicate the type and frequency of services that will be available to those individuals who will be entering into your program? When we talk about leverage of funding, which is also a scored category on your application, did you complete the budget? Did you use the budget template that was provided? Did you provide the 15-year performer that was required if it was a capital project? Does the budget ensure that there's going to be some long-term operational viability of the project? So is the project sustainable beyond the initial funding? Does the plan or the budget that you provided to us provide a percentage of the overall cost of the project? That includes your operational costs and your building costs. Can we see the big picture of this, and how long and how you will be able to sustain this project beyond the initial funding from Georgia Rehoused? And does the plan provide the amount and type of additional capital secured to support the building and ongoing operations? Did you provide match information? Did you articulate what that match information is? So if it is you are getting donations from the organization, did you identify what that total amount is and what it will be going towards on this project? So being very clear on what your match information is, how it will help the project, and how it will be sustainable if awarded funding. And so those are all of the things that your scorers are looking for when they are looking at they're looking at your applications. So be sure that you are addressing those things and that it is clear so that the scorers can see that these things are being met and that your project is sustainable and meets the requirements of Georgia Rehoused. In order to receive a site visit, I do want to make you all aware that there is a site visit component to Georgia Rehoused. In order to receive a site visit for us to further review, your application has to receive a score of 70 or more, and you will receive a notification from the State Housing Trust Fund about scheduling a site visit to come out to see the actual site for your capital projects or services that you're providing, for us to kind of do an evaluation in person of the actual project that you are proposing. I do want to stop here to see if anyone has questions before we move into the submission instructions, as well as going through each of the notice of funding. I know that that was a lot of information at once, but again, we will be putting this on the DCA website under the Georgia Rehoused. Kimberly?
Hi, good morning. You said that we will be getting a recommendation letter if we provided the pre-application. When can we expect that letter?
So the turnaround on the pre-applications is 2 weeks from the date that you submitted the pre-application.
Thank you.
Welcome. So submission instructions is all applications are due by August 19th at 5 p.m. And all applications have to be submitted through the job form that is located on the DCA Georgia Rehouse webpage. There is a link that says competitive application. If you click it, it will take you directly to the job form. For the award process, successful applicants will receive a written notice of award, which will include all required information needed to proceed, including but not limited to your grant award amount, your grant agreement and request for signatures, reporting requirements and timelines, match documentation requirements, disbursement instructions, and monitoring expectations. Award notices will be issued upon approval of the State Housing Trust Fund, and as funds remain available. The trust fund reserves the right to issue awards in cycles as determined necessary to support program administration and statewide distribution. And the trust fund reserves the right to fund all or none of the application received as a result of this announcement as funding is available. So now we're going to get into each of the notices of funding. We'll go through them to just talk about the funding opportunity, the awarding of funds, and the match requirement for each of those, as well as the eligible activities and ineligible activities for each of the notice of fundings. We'll start with the supportive services notice of funding. This funding opportunity is going to be for your qualified entity seeking to provide supportive services that are going to be designed to engage, stabilize, and rehouse individuals and families experiencing unsheltered homelessness throughout the state of Georgia. And that applicants may apply for up to $3 million in grant awards. Projects will be awarded no more than $15,000 per person served. This is going to be a reimbursable grant. The match requirement is 100%, but 50% of that 100% can be in kind match. And if you are looking to provide more than 50% of an in-kind match, you must receive a waiver from the commission. Those instructions are on the Georgia Rehoused webpage. Your eligible activities under this, I do want to make note though, before we go into the eligible activities, if you're requesting funding for these activities, applicants must demonstrate that there are currently no other public funds available for the proposed activities. So your eligible activities are going to be street outreach and engagement, which includes coordinated encampment engagement, removal, and relocation efforts, your intensive case management, behavioral health and recovery supports, employment and economic mobility supports, and integrated service partnerships, and 2-year shelter operations for emergency or temporary shelter programs. For your encampment response, removal, and reallocation requirements, compliance with humane and service-oriented encampment removal practices, State Housing Trust Fund does reserve the right to review these practices, and participant level outcomes. So when you're doing encampment response, removal, and relocation, you must track and report outcomes for individuals residing in encampments who are engaged through program activities, to include the number of individuals assessed and offered services, the number of individuals accepting services, the number of individuals placed into emergency or temporary shelter, the number of individuals transitioned into permanent housing, and the number of individuals who decline services or cannot be located. There are some compliance requirements. All encampments removal activities must prioritize the safety and well-being of an individual, and projects must provide individuals with adequate notice and opportunity to access services and housing opportunities prior to removal. Avoid activities that will result in individual being displaced without connection to housing and services, and have documented procedures that protect personal property and minimize disruption. And again, the State Housing Trust Fund does reserve the right to review encampment response protocols to ensure that they are compliant. Your ineligible activities under this notice is going to be capital construction or real estate acquisition, non-service related infrastructures, long-term housing development or rental subsidies, and fixtures, furnishings, and equipment. Applicants may request reimbursements for services provided from January 2026 to May 2026 if the applicant can demonstrate how it would enable them to further reduce unsheltered homelessness. And applicants should only choose this option if the original fund source used to cover services or encampment removal costs are more restrictive fund sources and can be deployed effectively and immediately elsewhere. Now we will talk about the State Housing Trust Fund for the Homeless Acute Homeless Response for Capital Projects Notice. This funding opportunity is to promote development and sustainability of non-congregate shelters or transitional housing. This program seeks to create private room setting and temporary housing models that provide a stable bridge to long-term residency. The available funds is applicants may apply for up to $10 million in grants, and the grant is reimbursable, and projects may spend no more than $300,000 of this grant on each unit that is developed. There is a 100% match requirement, and only 10% of that match can be in kind. If you want to use more than 10% of in kind, you have to submit a waiver request to the State Housing Trust Fund. The funding priorities here are target high need and infrastructure constrained areas, maximize resources, community coordination, strength community, overcome barriers, leverage expert partnerships, and demonstrate scalable impact. Requirements, feasibility, which is going to include your zoning compliance, land use approvals, and other regulatory barriers, and project underwriting and operating viability. Eligible activities. Here is project acquisition, construction, new development, rehabilitation and renovation, adaptive reuse, site and infrastructure preparation, pre-development costs, fixtures, furnishings, and equipment, and then a developer fee for no more than up to 10% of the total amount that is being requested. Ineligible activities are going to be gap financing for projects receiving other DCA administered resources, completed projects or retroactive reimbursements, and then any of your operating uses, including property operations, supportive or enable services, staffing and administration, resident stability supports, and indirect costs. There is a compliance and regulatory requirement under this notice as well. All groups associated with the development are responsible for ensuring the proposed program activities, goals, and timetables comply with all state laws and other regulations and other requirements, and in accordance with state or local codes, ordinance, and requirements, or such other requirements that the state may establish, including those for disaster mitigation. And your requirements include but are not limited to those contained in the notice of funding. So please be sure that you read the notice of funding in its entirety. And all projects must comply with the following: your Georgia Public Works Construction Act's requirements, the Georgia Environmental Policy Act, and the 15-year compliance period for affordable and target populations served. We will now move to the State Housing Trust Fund for the Homeless Residential Housing Solutions Grants. This is for qualified entities to seek to create or preserve permanent residential units appropriate for households with low or moderate incomes, including but not limited to individuals experiencing homelessness, individuals at risk of homelessness, and households in need of affordable options within local labor markets. Applicants may apply for up to $2.5 million. Projects may spend no more than $300,000 on each unit that is being developed. And this is also a reimbursable grant. Your match requirement is 100% with 50% in kind. If you would like to do something over the 50% in kind, you must receive a waiver from the State Housing Trust Fund. The funding priorities here are to expand housing capacity, coordinate with employers, local governments, educational institutions, or healthcare providers, support mixed-use strategies, address regulatory and financing obstacles that have delayed housing production, provide housing opportunities through strong partnerships with local homeless service providers, and offer meaningful opportunities for replication in other communities facing some similar challenges. The requirements, which is going to be feasibility, it's also going to include those zoning compliance, land use approvals, and other regulatory barriers, and project underwriting and operational viability. Your eligible activities are going to be project property acquisition, construction, rehabilitation and renovation, adaptive reuse, modular manufacture and micro unit housing, site and infrastructure preparation, pre-development costs, fixtures, furnishings, and equipment, and then your developer fee can be up to 10%. Ineligible costs under this grant is going to be your gap financing for projects receiving other DCA administered resources, operating use, including your property operations, supportive or enabling services, staffing, and administration, resident stabilization supports, and indirect costs. The State Housing Trust Fund also reserves the right under this to determine whether costs associated with completed projects or previously incurred expenses are eligible for reimbursement under this grant. You are going to have the same regulatory and compliance requirements as you do for the Acute Homeless Response Grant for capital projects, which means that you must follow all of the program activities and timelines. You are required to comply with your Georgia Public Works Construction Act, the Georgia Environmental Policy Act, and the 15-year compliance period. The expected program outcomes for the Housing Solutions Grant is going to be the total number of permanent housing units to be created or preserved, the occupancy upon project completion, and reduction in unsheltered homeless population. And the State Housing Trust Fund reserves the right to establish additional outcome measures based on the project type and scope. We'll now get into the two new funding sources under Georgia Rehoused, which is the Veteran Housing Solutions. This invites applicants for qualified entities seeking to expand the availability of permanent or transitional housing for veterans throughout the state. Applicants may apply for up to $2 million in grant awards, and this is a reimbursable grant. The match requirement is 100% with 25% in kind. You are able to do, and anything over will require a waiver from the State Housing Trust Fund. The funding priorities under the Veteran Housing Solutions Grant is to expand housing capacity in high need or infrastructure constrained areas, maximize utilization of existing sites or buildings, coordinate with employers, local governments, educational institutions, or healthcare providers, support mixed-use strategies that strengthen the community, address regulatory and financing obstacles that have delayed housing production, provide housing opportunities through strong partnerships with local homeless service providers and veteran-specific service entities, and offer meaningful opportunities for replication in other communities facing similar challenges. I'm sorry. And then your feasibility is going to include zoning compliance, land use approvals, and other regulatory barriers, and project underwriting and operational viability. Your eligible items here are going to be property acquisition, construction, rehabilitation and renovation, adaptive reuse, modular manufactured and micro-unit housing, site and infrastructure preparation, pre-development costs, fixtures, furnishings, and equipment, and your developer fee up to 10%. Ineligible costs here are going to be gap financing for projects receiving other DCA administered resources, acquisition of an already developed project, and your operating use costs. There is compliance and regulatory requirements. They are the same as the previous two capital, making special note again to that 15-year compliance period for affordability and specific populations. The expected outcomes under the Veterans Housing Solutions Grant is going to be the total number of permanent housing units to be created or preserved, occupancy upon project completion, reduction in unsheltered homeless population for veterans, and the State Housing Trust Fund here does reserve the right to establish additional outcomes measured based upon the project type and the scope of the project. Next, we'll talk about the Georgia Rehoused Veterans Homeless Response and Prevention Services. This opportunity is for qualified entities seeking to provide supportive services designed to engage, stabilize, and rehouse veteran individuals and families experiencing unsheltered homelessness throughout the state. The applicant may apply for up to $500,000. Projects will be awarded no more than $15,000 per person served. This is a reimbursable grant. The match is 100%, with 50% of that being in kind. And if you wish to do something over the 50% in kind, you must get a waiver from the State Housing Trust Fund. If you are requesting funding for these activities listed below, you must demonstrate that there are currently no other public funds available for the proposed activity. Here, the eligible activities may include rental stability support, which is up to $8,000 per household, which include your direct financial assistance and your housing stability services, intensive case management, behavioral health and recovery supports, employment and economic mobility supports, and your integrated service partnerships. Your direct financial assistance, this is going to include providing single, non-reoccurring emergency financial payments made directly to third-party vendors to assist with immediate lease defaults and support rental security, one-time emergency rental assistance, mandatory court costs and legal fees directly to rental stability support or negotiating a housing resolution, and your rental arrears necessary to maintain housing or prevent lease termination for an individual. For your housing stabilities, that is going to look at housing mediation and conflict resolution, housing stability, education regarding tenant rights and responsibility. And your ineligible expenses under the Veterans Housing is going to be your capital construction or real estate acquisition, your non-service related infrastructures, long-term housing development or rental subsidies, and fixtures, furnishings, and equipment. I will now hand it over to Ms. Alona Nagy to talk about our home art grant.
Thanks, Ashley. Next slide, please. And I'm here to talk about the Home American Rescue Plan Small Scale Rental Housing Development Grant. The funding opportunity, and we have about 20 minutes left, so I'll make this quick. Applications from qualified entities seeking to build, operate, and maintain small-scale developments of 11 units or less that serve those experiencing or at risk of homelessness as defined through Home Art federal guidelines. These units require at least a short-term lease because they are rental housing. However, if agreeable to those terms, these units can be used as rental housing, transitional housing, as a non-congregate shelter in less populated areas, or supportive housing. The awarding of funds, applicants may apply for up to $2 million in grant awards. Projects may spend no more than $300,000 of this grant on each unit developed. This is a reimbursable grant. And there is no matching requirement beyond the financial feasibility for your project development. So the preferences are duplexes, triplexes, and fourplexes of non-traditional housing types, including manufactured housing, which are factory built that meet HUD codes, including steel chassis and placed on a permanent foundation, as well as modular options. So factory built housing that meet state and local building codes, assembled on site and placed on a permanent foundation. So the other funding options, we have opened it up for this particular funding round of small hotels or hospital/nursing home rehabilitations, new construction of small developments. So we're not just focusing on the manufactured modular, though we are encouraging that just because that's not something that Georgia has done a whole lot, and we wanted to explore what that looks like in different areas of the state. And then any other innovative development ideas depending on the feasibility of the proposal. So if you have other options, we are open to reading about those. So please send in your ideas. If you haven't before the at the pre-application. So the requirements for rental housing development grant is the feasibility, including zoning compliance, land use approvals, and other regulatory barriers, and then also the project underwriting and operating viability. So the activities you can have are property acquisition, construction and new development, site and infrastructure preparation, pre-development costs. We are offering also short-term rental assistance for constructed units. That's up to $24,000 per unit per year. And that is through 2029, 2030, when the Home Art grant closes and sunsets. Also, these units are eligible for other rental assistance to be placed on the unit, such as a local project-based voucher, and a developer fee of 10% is eligible. Ineligible activities get financing for projects receiving other DCA administered resources, operating uses such as property operations, supportive or enabled services, staffing and administration, residential stabilization supports, and indirect costs. And then as far as compliance and regulatory requirements, I'll go ahead and let you all read through this essentially because it is a federal grant. There are regulatory requirements with regards to environmental and labor requirements while building the structures. I can go to the next slide, please, Ashley. Thanks. Also, tenant screening requirements. Low barrier procedures are required. Tenant eligibility verification for all the 4 qualifying populations for Home Art. project-specific waitlist management, which is a part of the regulations, and then property service plans and eviction prevention measures. Rents can be no more than 30% of resident income, and they follow the home rental requirements. And up to $24,000, like we said, short-term rental assistance and units are also eligible for that additional rental assistance, like we just said. And these units do require a short-term lease. Next slide, please. Okay. The characteristics of a strong application. So we've reviewed a lot of applications over the last few months, and so these are just our recommendations that we encourage you all to take a look at. So local government and community commitment. This is a really important part of Georgia Rehoused. So have that partnership with your local government. If you are not the local government, show that there is a collaborative partnership and that you are both interested in the project success if there's a nonprofit or another entity in addition to the local government. The investment by the local government can include financial contributions, waiver permit, donated land and facilities, or other documented commitments, and community partnerships that demonstrate that there's a shared interest in the project. So whatever that looks like, we're open, but just show that both have some what we call skin in the game to really see this project be something that can contribute to the community for a long time. So services, financial contributions, and other documented commitments. Next slide, please. We would also love to see demonstrated impact. Data is important, please. So clear explanation of how the project will reduce homelessness, measurable outcomes that align with proposed data, and clear anticipated community impact aligned with identified local homeless needs. So oftentimes, we all see things that we need to get accomplished in a community. And so offering the data behind that is important, not just personal experience. So we would love to know why you feel this is important from your own personal experience, as well as the data that backs up the need. Again, going into the data-driven planning that I just kind of briefly mentioned too, showing that there's local data that supports the need for this project, information that identifies service gaps, and data demonstrating why the project approach is appropriate for the community. The long-term strategy, supporting the broader regional homeless response strategy, evidence that the strategy is to keep individuals housed outside of continuous subsidies. And so really looking at housing stability long-term and those plans for stability beyond the initial funding. Additionally, complete and realistic budget. The budgets are really important, and please be sure to use the template that you've been provided. Complete those operation and development cost budgets to include the overhead costs. We don't want to know just about the services, but also what it takes to provide those services, and clearly identifying your funding sources and evidence that the project is financially feasible long-term. Funding need and non-duplication. Projects that expand services and create a new capacity or enhance local homeless response systems. And applications should clearly demonstrate that requested funds are not replacing or duplicating costs already supported through other public or private funding sources. So it's important to note that doing what you have available, assets in your community, and then seeing how you can meet any of the additional needs in addition to those assets that you have in your community. Thank you so much. Next one, the application procedure. Applications for Georgia Rehoused must be submitted electronically, as Ashley talked about before. And that checklist that she gave as far as all the steps that you need to take and everything that you need to include. The application will close on August 19th at 5 p.m. and anything accepted after 5 p.m., including 5:01, will not be accepted. So please plan accordingly with your schedule that day. if you're submitting on the 19th, you must upload all required documentation. And for any questions, please send an email to SHTF, that stands for State Housing Trust Fund, at dca.ga.gov. Next slide, please. And now we're opening it up for questions. We have 10 minutes. We would love to hear from y'all. Okay, now you're able to put any questions in the chat. You're able to go ahead and come off mute. There's only 13 of us in the room, and it looks like a good portion of us are DCA staff as well. So you have the floor. So we would love to hear any questions that you have about any of the notices of funding that we are publishing, as well as any of the information that we've covered within the last 50 minutes. Ashley, do you have anything else that you'd like to mention?
No, I do want to thank everybody for joining us today to learn more about the competitive application. So thank you. Jerica?
Yes, thank you guys so much. Yes, my name is Jerika, and I work at a community health center, Valley Healthcare System. We are a federally qualified healthcare center. And just listening to the amazing resource grant opportunities is awesome. I've been taking notes here. And it led me to really wonder which of these opportunities would we more so qualify to apply for, because we are a healthcare center and we're like total healthcare. I always tell people, when you think about a super Walmart, I refer to our community health center is that we're a one-stop total healthcare system where you can get all of the different things from your healthcare needs to food security to case management, care coordination, mental health, homelessness, advocacy, outreach, patient care, medical home perspective. So on that note, we're not looking to build a, bedding facility to house any of the clients that we serve, but we do look to strengthen and close the loop on a warm handoff. And on that note, our adage is no wrong door. We have this bi-directional approach where we want to truly meet our stakeholders and people where they're at, and we believe in the power of wraparound. So on that note, which of these opportunities, I'm just looking for some technical assistance and feedback from you guys, would we more so align according to the work and the mission that we stand on, would we look to be able to apply for that you would recommend?
And just a quick
Go ahead.
question. Have you been involved with your local coordinated entry system?
Yes, absolutely. We have a very good and solid, strong relationship with our COC here in Chattahoochee.
Perfect.
Yes.
Okay, that's great.
So I'm assuming a pre-application has been submitted by your organization. And so in that pre-application, we will tell you what funding source that you need to apply back to when we send over the recommendation letter. We'll give you the exact funding source or an exact notice that you need to apply under. I wouldn't know off the top of my head just now hearing what you said. I would need to look at the total project for us to offer a recommendation. So the team will review and tell you the exact notice of funding in which you should apply under once you receive your recommendation letter back.
Okay, that is perfect. And thank you for helping us to notate that and just kind of looking at the order of operations of how that flow works. So thank you. That was necessary. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. I don't see any questions in the chat. Okay, go ahead, Kimberly.
When will you guys be posting this? I know there was an older version of this from like 3 months ago.
So this,
But I think there were like a couple slides I was like screenshotting, I missed them. But when will this one be up?
this should be up by Friday. This should be
Okay.
on the DCA Georgia Rehoused webpage. So be on the lookout for it. The recording will be there as well as this PowerPoint.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Do we have any more questions?
I do have another question, just out of curiosity, because there are several potential grant resource allocations. Do you have a set number of how many you will, I guess, release for each, or is it just collectively across these resources, one per grant, or do you have any of that to give, or is it just like at your discretion to help with that part?
So, no, we don't have a set number of how many awardees that we will award. There are a couple of things that go into us determining how many grant awards will be released. One, which is probably the most important one, the availability of funding, as well as kind of what we're looking at as the overall projects, sustainability of those projects. So we look at a couple of different things to determine how many awards will go out. So there are a bunch of different factors that go into how many awards we will release.
Well, and Ashley, correct me if I'm wrong, but one of those factors is really the completion of the applications, both in the pre-app as well as like we went through the full list of our recommendations on what we would like to see. So just making sure that your application is complete with regards to your budgets, making sure that you have that strong connection with a local entity if you are not that local entity. Things like that really can ensure that the concept that you have can come into fruition through this grant. So, because I know that there's a ton of people throughout the state that have really great ideas. And so seeing that on paper um, in the structure that we've created is really important. So um, that's just something to note. So make sure you, when you download the whole presentation, that you take a look at that too, and just measure that alongside your application.
We have about 2 more minutes left, so I do want to acknowledge anyone else that may have any questions. You can feel free to put them in the chat. Yeah, go ahead.
I'm sorry, this is my last question.
No, no
Um,
worries. This is what this
You're
is
asking good
for.
questions.
because of the way our funding streams are set up at a federally qualified healthcare center, is there a mandatory match requirement for all of these or just some of these? And what would that look like under the CFR?
Do you mean because, okay, so since you're federally funded, you're wondering as
Yeah, yes, ma'am. And I apologize, Ms. Nagy. So, because of the
to,
way our budget is set up, we're very tight on funds, and I'm just kind of thinking out loud as I know once we look into this deeper with our CFO, we may or may not have those match requirements if there is a minimum percentage threshold. So, hypothetically speaking, if that is the worst case scenario, what does that look like for the CFRs? Is there a mandatory match requirement to even qualify, or is there a point system where points will be deducted on your budget proposal? How does that look?
So for all of the notice of fundings, with the exception of home art, there is a required match. Each of them have different levels of in-kind match that you can put in, meaning you can trade off services or things that may not be dollar value. So it would just depend on the actual notice of funding that you are applying to, what that match would need to look like. And again,
Perfect.
if the matches need to be over the allotted match amount, then there is instructions on the State Housing Trust Fund under Georgia Rehoused that outlines what a waiver request is if the organization is trying to go over the allowable required in-kind match amount, but that is a determination made by the State Housing Trust Fund if they will allow that in-kind match over what is already outlined in the grant.
Oh, that is perfect. And thank you for mentioning the in-kind as an alternative. That was very helpful. So thank you so much.
You're welcome. We are now at 12 o'clock, well, 12:01 actually. If there are any more questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. You can come off mute now. If you think of any questions later, please feel free to email the State Housing Trust Fund. The email is here on the screen. Again, thank you all so much for joining us today. We look forward to reviewing your projects if you are applying in the competitive round. And again, thank you for all of the work that you do for the individuals in the state of Georgia.
Thanks so much.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.